let's start kind of like we always do with like what comes up for you on gender and religion. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with Mama Gina. She is another like coach and writer, and um, kind of like I'm in her lineage of like wild women uncovering more of their pleasure as a practice. And one of the practices that she has people do is something called spring cleaning, where you sit with someone or you talk to them on the phone and you ask like, what do you have on X? And it can be like, what do you have on money? What do you have on female friendship? What do you have on any topic that's got a little bit of charge? And the other person just talks like, when I think of this, I think of blah, 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 blah. And they just keep going till the timer goes off. You know, I was really curious about gender and about especially feminism and women's rights from a really early age in like a way that my parents thought was really weird. Like I grew up in a really liberal part of California. There was like really no reason that I should be so interested. Like no one really was being like oppressed around me, but I was still like, I gave a talk on the feminine mystique and Betty Friedan to my 5th grade class with this like little popsicle stick of Betty Friedan that I cut out. And I like dragged my 8th grade boyfriend to a Gloria Steinem talk. I just was so into it. I was always like so into it. And then my relationship with church was sort of this separate thing, but I never grew up going to a church where gender was a big deal. And then when I got to college, I started to kind of like fall in with this crowd where that was much more of a conversation. And I kind of stood out, I think, because I was already such a feminist, but I also was curious. And there was a way of talking about the gender politics of church that I was attracted to. And I actually have like never admitted this or talked about this really in this way. But the truth is like something about the way that women were getting described as being valuable, even though different, I was like, okay, well, like, go on. Like, it doesn't sound totally normal and right, but it doesn't sound as wrong as I maybe would have thought. This kind of like, you're so precious. That's why you can't talk. I don't know. Looking back now, I'm like, what a disaster. But in the moment, I think especially because I was learning a lot about violence against women and my work was starting to take shape around trauma. I was studying sex trafficking. I was getting ready to go to Cambodia and work in anti-trafficking work. And something about like a rhetoric of cherish and a rhetoric of like protection and rescue and like, I don't know, this kind of like keep women safe felt like a little bit intriguing and maybe even a little bit on track. It almost felt to me like, oh, this is another way of responding. We agree about the problem. We agree that there's a problem of like women being in danger or like men hurting women or the patriarchy even, although they like wouldn't have said that that was the problem. But you know, that was what I was seeing. And so I thought like, okay, like, well, you know, maybe one answer is like more power for women, and maybe this is like another route of like use the power that you have as men to stop hurting us. And I was like, well, that also sounds good. And so I got like a little bit just tangled in it. And I think that it really helped me and was like more confusing to dive deeper into what actually was in like religious teachings around gender. And then to try to parse out like, well, which pieces of this are liberatory and which pieces are just like patriarchy dressed in like kind of like fancier language with no wiggle room because it's from God. And when you fast forward to now, maybe like 10 years later, I think about my friends and colleagues who have less of a Christian background. Like one in particular, who a woman I'm working with who lives in Indonesia, and her family is Muslim, and her whole community is really devout Muslim. And she was talking about how like her neighbors know that she doesn't raise her kids with like the same strict standards that they have for like their daughters, that she's actually talking to her daughter about sex, that there's like all of this kind of taboo breaking stuff that she's doing, and she's feeling kind of nervous about it. And it was like something about knowing, like, of course, intellectually, I knew that this was a conversation across borders and across religious traditions, but because like my experience was so rooted in the Judeo-Christian tradition, I like didn't really explore that much. But something about like immediately like in my face, us talking about it made me realize like, oh yeah, this is so much bigger. This is really everywhere, and it's important for us to think about it and to think about like what kind of world we want to make.